Welcome to the Arithmetic Zone and welcome back to our series on making our final website. I am back on Visual Studio Code and I already opened up my website using Live Server just to save a little time. So in the last video for this series, we finished the About page where we learned about iframe and we also made sure our website was responsive for mobile display. So today what I want to work on is the News page, and I said before that I want to make this page using objects, which we learned earlier, because it will greatly simplify the process and it will organize our code and make it easier to add new data. So let's see how we can go about this. So in our News HTML page, you can see we have all our code for the navigation bar with this div. So underneath it, I'm going to make another div. I'm going to give it an ID and we're going to call it main container. And inside of this div is where we're going to include all of our data using objects. So again, to use objects, we're going to need a JavaScript file. So I'm going to make a new file. Let's call it news.js. And to get the ID of the main container, we're going to reference that ID in our JavaScript file using a variable and DOM. So let's say let main equals document.getElement by ID, and then we call the main container. Let me just double check. Alright, good. So we referenced it in our JavaScript file, so now we can add some functionality to it. But when we include data using objects, I think it's best to use two JavaScript files, one for the data itself and one for including it on the web page, especially if it's large data. So I'm going to actually make another JavaScript file. Let's call it data.js. And we got to link these two files to our HTML. So right here, we're going to write script source. And then we're going to write data.js. And don't forget to write the word defer, because you want the HTML to load before the JavaScript file. So now news.js. So we linked our two files together. We don't know if it works yet, obviously, because we haven't done anything, but we're going to take a little break from the news.js file and we're going to actually work on our data.js file. So we have to think, what information do we want to include here? When I plan to have this news page, what I was thinking about was having this little gateway to a table of articles that you could theoretically view, and each one of them comes with a picture, a date, maybe the author name, and a short little description. Obviously, they're not going to be real articles. You're not going to be able to actually click on them and read them, but it's just going to give you this nice little display. And it's a cool way to show off how you can use objects in websites beyond those simple movie lists that I showed earlier. So to make, all these objects, I'm going to make an array of objects. So let data equals and then hard brackets. And inside these hard brackets, we're going to have our objects. Each one is going to represent an article. So it's going to be an article about some news story relating to weather. So I have some ideas. My first one's going to be hurricane, and to denote objects, you use the squiggly brackets, and inside we're gonna write all of our properties. So I think the first thing we gotta have is a picture. Obviously I don't have the picture yet, so I'm just gonna leave this a blank string for now, and I'm gonna get the pictures later. And I think each one of them should also have a title. So that means let's give it I don't know, Hurricane Earl approaches, some random name. I don't know how they name hurricanes, but anyway, we have our picture, we have our title. What else do you usually see when you scroll by a list of articles? Well, you see maybe a short little description. So I'm gonna write desk, and then experts predict that this category 5 hurricane will reach New York by tomorrow. Hopefully not, but that's going to be our little short description, our little blurb. And I think finally there should be a date, and I think a date should be after the title but before the description. So let's write in today's date, or at least for me, February 12th. I actually recommend if you're dealing with dates on a computer to write your dates like this. It's the ISO standard, writing in years, then months, then days, because when you have a list of files and you name them based on a date, this format ensures that the most recent files come up first, because that's how the computer orders them. Orders files alphabetically and numerically. So this format ensures that you have your most recent files at the top and your oldest files at the bottom. So I have my first object right here. I'm going to come up with other possible, stories to talk about. So I'm not going to show all this out. I'll show you what I write in the end. So I'll see you guys until then. Alright, so I'm back and I made an object for each article idea I had. You'll see what they are in a minute, and you can see I also added in images for each of the articles. Make sure that the picture corresponds with each image. I forgot to write this one. And also, I think I did accidentally name the date data. So, just change it to date and keep that in mind if you were following along. Anyway, now that we initialize all of our data here, we got to actually put it onto our website using the main JavaScript file, news.js. So what do we do with all this data? Well, I made a list of objects, so I'm going to have to traverse through this array, and I'm going to have to append all this information into that div. So to do that, we got to use a for loop. So for let I equals 0, I is less than data.length, which it knows what data is because we linked the two files together on the HTML page. Then I++, and inside of here we're gonna make another div within the main div, and this div is gonna be used for each article. So let main div equals document.createElement div. And now we gotta add all of our information into this div, but we gotta make separate elements before we can append it into the main div in the order that we want. So what order do we want? We want to first have the picture. So let pic div equals document.createElement img, and img.source, or rather pic div.source, is going to be equal to what property do we want to reference? Picture. So for every element in data, so data bracket I dot picture, and then we also got to specify the file extension. These are all JPEG files, but that might not be the case for you. But for me, I can just write in plus.jpg and everything is fine. Now we want to do the same concept, but now we got to do it for all the text. The title, I want it in h2, so let me just actually give these better names. Like title div equals document.createElement h2. Title div.enter HTML is going to be equal to data I dot title. And I'm just going to copy and paste this for the next two, which I believe are date and description. Those are both strings, so same concept, just change the name and change the tag. So date, I'm probably going to have in h3, and the description I'm going to have as just p. So desk div, and then this one should be called date div. So we now appended all of our information into all these separate divs. So now it's time to append everything into the main div. So main div, and we want to append it in the order that I specified. So pic div, title div. I realized I didn't actually change these, so let me do that. And then date div and desk div, and then obviously I just realized I wrote this wrong. Main div dot append. Obviously we didn't append main div itself into anything, but what we can append it into is the main container div that's already in our HTML page, so that it will actually display on our page. So main.append main div. So now that we did all of that, let's see if our website worked as expected. And it looks like it works. But why did the images not appear? Well, we forgot something crucial. I put them in a folder within this own use folder, in another images folder. So within our pic div, we're gonna have to reference that folder name, images / and then plus the data information and then the file extension. Now we see that the pictures are all here, and obviously they're all very different sizes. So how can we adjust that? We could use CSS, but seeing as we're already on the JavaScript file, let's do it on the JavaScript file instead. So picdiv.style, if you want to change the style of anything, you have to always reference style, and then width equals 100 pixels. Let's make it all consistent. Well, that's too small, so let's make it 300. Alright, that looks good. And obviously, you know, this looks pretty ugly right now. So how can we change this? I think a good way to separate all these articles is to use alternating colors for the background of each article. But how can I do that? Well, I gotta make a variable. So let's say let background color, or let's just say let background equal 0. It could be a number. So right here, if background is equal to 0, you remember to use double equal signs when comparing things. We're gonna make the main div dot style dot background color, not backdrop filter, background color equal white. Else we're gonna make the background color a different color. So let's see if I can use some hexadecimal here. I'm gonna try to see if I can find a cream color. It looks like they don't give me suggestions here. It only does that for CSS, so I'll be right back. So a quick Google search gave me this hexadecimal code for cream. So let's see if it works. Let's see if it looks decent. And obviously, you know, background, it needs to change. So we're gonna make background, or actually, we're gonna change the background color here. Background equals 1, and then background equals 0 here. So it'll always be between 0 and 1. Let's see if our code works as expected. And it looks like it does. And the cream doesn't look too bad, but obviously our code does need a bit of work right here. What our code can really use is padding. So main div dot style dot padding, we're gonna give it 20 pixels. Alright, that looks much better. I think our images could use some borders. So within picdiv dot style dot border equals 4px black solid. If you notice, all these properties are the same properties that you'd reference in your CSS file, but I'm just doing it in the JavaScript instead. Now they all have borders, and I think I want to move the date and the descriptions a little to the right so that the title isn't, you know, to the right of these text. That just looks strange. To adjust that, let's increase the margins of the left side of both the date div and the desk div. So date div dot style dot margin left equals 20 pixels, and we're going to do the same thing for the desk div. And that looks much better. And honestly, I think it looks pretty good. So as you can see, my articles, you know, these are all fake, obviously. And hey, some of these are pretty funny, I think. But I'll leave it up to you to read them. Now we got to see if all this looks good when we factor in responsive design. And I think it actually looks really nice. All that really needs to change is making all this text centered. when it's in this display. So we got to go back into our CSS because dealing with responsive design in JavaScript, I think, is just not worth it. So I navigated to my single CSS file back in home, and I'm looking at this section of my code right here where I specify that it should only activate when the display is less than 1030 pixels. So going back to our news.html page, we gave our main container an ID of main container. So let's specify main container, and just to make sure, let's see if we accidentally gave, this name to any other part of our code. It looks like I haven't, so we're safe. So all we have to do is text align center. So now, obviously our text isn't being aligned in the center right now because our display is greater than that amount of pixels, but press inspect, go on to this mode of display right here, and now all of our text is centered and it looks much nicer on our phone. So that's mostly it for the content of this video. I think, as just a little something I could do is maybe make our navigation bar a little more fleshed out using JavaScript or CSS. I want it so that when you hover over it, it displays something to the user to tell them, hey, you can click on this. And usually when you hover over something that you can click, maybe the color changes, it becomes a little transparent. So we're going to investigate ways we can do that. So if you look at all of our web pages right here, you will notice that in our navigation bar, we gave it the class of nav item and nav text. In my CSS file, I referenced those IDs and classes right here. And note in our HTML that the actual content of the navigation bar are all A tags, and that's what we're going to have to change right here. But we're not going to do it. We're not going to write our code underneath here because we want this to only happen when we hover over these links. So we're going to write in, let me just press enter. Let's write in another section of CSS code, but we want it to only activate when we hover over it. And what can we do right here? Well, you can make it bolder. So font weight bolder. So let's just see if that works. And it does. When you hover over it, it bolds. So that's a pretty good indication that, hey, you can click on this if you hover over it. And this should work for all the web pages. And it does. Finally, as for the other pages in this website, I do want to add a footer. But that should be very simple. Just simple copy and paste. So let's go into home.html, copy our footer, and include it in our news page underneath the body. And now when we go to news, it's included right there. And it looks fine on mobile as well. So anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Was somewhat long, but trust me, the timeline page is definitely going to require the most effort by far out of any of the pages right here. And it may require an additional JavaScript lesson depending on what type of syntax I use, but that's something that I'll resolve later. And anyway, I'll see you guys next time.